Tasha had been looking forward to this quiet afternoon. After a long day at work, she had planned to stop by the local convenience store and pick up a few essentials. It wasn't anything special, just some milk, bread, and snacks for the weekend, but it was a moment of peace, a break from the busy schedule. She slipped into the small store, greeted by the cool air conditioning and the familiar scent of groceries and cleaning products. As she walked down the aisles, she felt the weight of the day lifting. Her heels clicked softly on the polished floor as she moved toward the dairy section. She smiled at the familiar brands on the shelves. Tasha had been coming to this store for years, and she knew everyone by face, even if they didn't always speak. She wasn't in a rush, just enjoying the simple task of getting what she needed. Tasha was a woman of strength, someone who had faced many challenges throughout her life. She wasn't just any regular person walking through the store, she was someone who had earned respect in ways most people would never understand. But she didn't always share that side of her. Most didn't know about her time in the Navy, her training as a Navy SEAL, the years of tough, demanding work she had gone through to make it in a field dominated by men. She had kept that part of her life tucked away, part of her past that no one needed to know about. She liked to keep things simple. As she reached for the milk, she heard a voice behind her. "Hey, you. What are you doing here?" Tasha turned around, surprised. Standing behind her was a man in a police officer's uniform. He didn't seem familiar, but there was something in the way he looked at her that made her feel uneasy. As the weeks passed, Tasha found herself reflecting on everything that had transpired since that day in the store. The whole experience had changed her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had faced injustice and responded with grace and strength, and now, as she sat in her apartment, she felt a sense of empowerment she hadn't felt in a long time. The past few months had been difficult, but they had also been a reminder of why she had joined the Navy in the first place. It wasn't just about proving she could handle the physical challenges or the grueling training. It was about something much deeper, fighting for what was right, standing up for people who didn't have a voice, and using her strength to make a difference. She thought about her time in the Navy, the countless hours spent training with others who shared her commitment and drive. Those were some of the toughest days of her life, but also some of the most rewarding. She had been pushed to her limits, mentally and physically, but she had survived. And that had made her stronger, not just as a soldier, but as a person. But today, she was fighting a different battle. This wasn't about physical endurance or strategic thinking, it was about standing up against something far too many people in her community faced: abuse of power, racial discrimination, and the everyday injustices that people often felt powerless to confront. And she wasn't going to let her story be swept under the rug. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a text from Jessica, the friend who had been there for her since the beginning. Jessica had been a fellow Navy SEAL and someone who understood exactly what Tasha was going through. They had fought side by side in training and had seen each other at their most vulnerable moments. "How are you holding up? Let's catch up soon," the text read. Tasha smiled, grateful for Jessica's support. She quickly typed a reply. "I'm good. Been busy, but I'm hanging in there. We should catch up soon. How's everything with you?" A few seconds later, Jessica replied. "Same here. Busy, but I'm good. Let me know when you have time to chat. And don't forget, you're doing an amazing job. What happened at the store? It's making waves?" Tasha felt a warm sense of appreciation as she read the message. Jessica always knew how to make her feel supported, no matter the distance between them. They hadn't seen each other in person for a while, but their bond remained as strong as ever. "Thanks, Jess. It's been a lot, but I'm pushing through. I'll call you soon. Let's catch up and share some good news for a change." Tasha put her phone down and turned her attention to the next step. She had been working hard to make sure that Officer Larson's actions didn't go unnoticed. With Sarah's help, the formal complaint had been filed, and the investigation had resulted in disciplinary action against him. But Tasha knew that the fight wasn't over. It wasn't enough to just have one officer held accountable. The bigger picture was much broader. She had heard from several people in her community who had faced similar mistreatment at the hands of authority figures. They had been hesitant to speak out, fearing retaliation or not being believed. Tasha realized that she had become a voice for them, and she wasn't going to let their stories fade away. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was an email. It was from a local advocacy group that had reached out to her after her interview had aired on the news. They had been following her story and wanted to know if she would be willing to join them in pushing for police reform in the community. The email was heartfelt, and the group offered their support to help her make a lasting change. They wanted to use her story as a stepping stone to help others who had been wronged by the system, just as she had been. Tasha read the email carefully, her mind racing with possibilities. This was exactly what she had been hoping for, an opportunity to make a real impact, to use her voice for something greater than herself. She immediately picked up the phone and called Sarah, eager to hear her thoughts. "Hey, Sarah," Tasha said when her attorney answered. "I just got an email from this advocacy group. They want me to work with them on police reform and help get the word out. What do you think?" Sarah paused for a moment before responding. "Tasha, this is huge. I think it's a great opportunity for you to expand your reach and help make real change. You've already done so much by standing up to Officer Larson, and now you have the chance to influence others on a larger scale." Tasha's heart beat faster as Sarah's words sank in. She had been thinking about this for a while, but hearing it from Sarah gave her the confidence to move forward. She wasn't alone in this. She had a team of people who believed in her and in the cause she was fighting for. "I'm in," Tasha said firmly. "I want to help. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about everyone who's been mistreated. I want to make sure they're heard." Over the next few days, Tasha worked closely with the advocacy group to strategize how they could take her story and turn it into a movement. They focused on police accountability, educating the community about their rights, and pushing for changes within the local police department. Tasha spoke at several community meetings, sharing her experience and encouraging others to speak up if they had been wronged. As she stood in front of crowds, telling her story and listening to others share theirs, she realized that this was what she had been meant to do all along. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a voice for the voiceless. Her military training had taught her how to be strong under pressure, but it was her experiences as a woman, as a Black woman, that gave her the power to connect with others and fight for justice. The changes didn't happen overnight, but they started to build momentum. The local police department began to implement more training on de-escalation tactics, and several officers were held accountable for past actions. Tasha's story had sparked a movement, and while she knew there was still much work to be done, she felt hopeful for the future. One afternoon, as she walked home from a meeting, she saw a group of young people sitting outside a cafe, talking and laughing together. As she passed by, one of them stopped her. "Are you Tasha?" the young man asked. "We saw you on the news. You're the woman who stood up to the cop in the store." Tasha smiled, feeling a warm sense of pride. "Yes, that's me," she said, stopping to talk with him. "I hope my story helped you guys feel like you have the power to stand up for what's right." The young man grinned. "You did. You've inspired a lot of us. Keep doing what you're doing." Tasha waved goodbye and continued walking. As she passed by the cafe, she thought about how far she had come. The fight was far from over, but she knew that with every step, every word, every action, she was making a difference. Her journey had started with a moment of injustice, but it had grown into something much bigger. It was a fight for fairness, for accountability, and for the future of her community. And with each passing day, Tasha was more determined than ever to keep moving forward. "What's the problem?" Tasha asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Tasha stepped outside the store, her breath steady and calm despite the tension that had built up inside. The cool evening air brushed against her face, offering some comfort after the intense confrontation with office. The days following the confrontation with Officer Larson were filled with a mix of emotions for Tasha. On the one hand, she felt proud of standing up for herself, proud of the fact that she hadn't let that officer's aggression intimidate her. But on the other hand, she couldn't shake the weight of what had happened. It wasn't just the physical shove from the bookshelf that had bothered her, it was the fact that a police officer had thought he could use his position of power to bully her, someone who hadn't done anything wrong. It wasn't the first time she had faced challenges in her life. Tasha had always been the type to rise above, to push through obstacles without letting them define her. She had joined the Navy SEALs when the world told her she couldn't, and she had survived when so many others would have given up. But this wasn't the same. This wasn't a training exercise or a mission with clear objectives. This was personal. Still, she didn't let those feelings control her. Tasha had always known that if she wanted to make a difference, she would have to do it on her own terms. She wasn't going to wait for someone else to fix things for her. Her phone buzzed on the counter as she finished eating. It was an email notification from her lawyer, Sarah. She opened it eagerly, wanting to know what progress had been made with the formal complaint. The message was brief, but it was enough to reassure her. Sarah had already contacted the police department and set up a meeting to discuss the incident in more detail. Tasha had expected it to take a little time, but she knew that having an attorney who was as determined as Sarah made all the difference. Tasha smiled to herself as she read the email. It was one small victory in what would be a long process. But it was a victory, nonetheless. She had taken the first step, and now things were moving forward. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Tasha found herself pacing her living room, lost in thought. It was moments like this that reminded her of why she had joined the Navy in the first place. She had wanted to prove that she was capable of more, that she could be more than what the world expected of her. She had worked so hard to get where she was, but even after all these years, she still felt like she had something to prove. And now, she was proving it again, this time, not through physical endurance or the ability to fight, but through her strength to stand up for what was right. She had shown that sometimes the greatest battles were fought with words, with the courage to say enough is enough. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text message from a friend she hadn't spoken to in a while. It was from Jessica, a fellow Navy veteran who had been part of her training group. "Hey, I heard about what happened. Are you okay?" Tasha took a moment before responding. She wasn't sure how much to share. She didn't want to drag anyone else into her drama, but she also knew Jessica would understand. She had been through her own battles both on the battlefield and in civilian life. "I'm fine. Just had an unfortunate encounter with a cop today." The text was brief, but Tasha knew Jessica would want to hear more. She waited for a response, tapping her fingers on the edge of the coffee table as she tried to calm her nerves. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed again. "I know how these things go. You need backup, Tasha. I'm here for you." Tasha felt a wave of relief wash over her. Jessica's support meant more than she could put into words. She had fought beside her in training and had been there during the toughest moments of her life. Knowing that Jessica had her back now, even from a distance, gave her the strength to keep going. "Thanks, Jess. I'm handling it, but I'll keep you posted." Tasha sent the message and set her phone down. She didn't want to dwell on the negative. She had work to do, and this situation wasn't going to fix itself. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and phone calls. Sarah had helped her file the formal complaint against Officer Larson, and now it was a matter of waiting for the department to investigate. But even as things started to unfold, Tasha knew that she couldn't just sit back and wait for change to come. She needed to take action in other ways, to make sure this incident wasn't just a footnote in her life. It was then that Tasha decided to share her story publicly. She knew that this wasn't just about her, it was about raising awareness for others who had been treated unfairly, others who felt powerless in situations like hers. She wasn't going to let her story be buried. She contacted a local news outlet, explaining what had happened in the store. It wasn't about seeking fame or attention, it was about making sure that what had happened to her wouldn't happen to someone else. She wasn't going to be silenced, not this time. The response came faster than she expected. The reporter was interested in her story, and within days, Tasha found herself sitting in front of a camera, recounting the events that had transpired in that convenience store. She spoke calmly and confidently, just like she had when she stood up to Officer Larson. "I'm not here to make anyone look bad," she said during the interview. "I'm here because I want to make sure that people understand what happened and that we don't let this kind of behavior slide. We can do better. We have to do better." The interview aired later that week, and Tasha's words resonated with many. People from all walks of life reached out to her, sharing their own stories of mistreatment and discrimination. It was overwhelming, but it was also empowering. Tasha had no idea how many others had been through similar experiences, how many had felt the same way she did when she stood in that store. She wasn't alone. The response from the community was overwhelming, but it was the support from other veterans, especially those who had served with her, that meant the most. They knew firsthand what it took to be strong in the face of adversity, what it meant to fight for something greater than yourself. Tasha kept going. She knew there would be days when she felt discouraged, when the weight of the situation threatened to pull her down. But she wasn't going to let it. She had faced far worse in her life, and this was just one more battle that she was determined to win. A few weeks later, Tasha received an email from Sarah. The investigation into Officer Larson's actions had been completed, and the department had taken disciplinary action against him. He had been placed on administrative leave while they reviewed his history of complaints. While Tasha knew that it wasn't the complete victory she had hoped for, it was a start. It was a sign that change was possible. As she read through the email, a small smile tugged at her lips. She had made a difference. She had fought for justice, not just for herself, but for others who might never have the chance to stand up like she did. Tasha closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. The fight wasn't over, but she was ready for whatever came next. She had taken the first step, and that was all she needed to keep moving forward. R. Larson. She paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts. The last thing she had wanted was to cause a scene, but sometimes standing up for what's right meant doing just that. Her mind wandered back to the years of training she had endured as a Navy SEAL. The grueling tests, the long nights without sleep, the constant physical and mental strain, all of it had been designed to break her, to make her question whether she had the strength to go on. But she had pushed through, each obstacle making her stronger, more determined. She had learned to handle stress in ways few people could understand, and that was exactly what had helped her stay calm in the face of Officer Larson's aggression. She knew that this wasn't over. Filing the report was just the beginning. She had made it clear to the officer that she would not let his actions slide, and she wasn't about to let anyone else think they could get away with similar behavior. As she walked down the sidewalk, she noticed a few people glancing at her. Some seemed to recognize her from the store, their faces uncertain, while others avoided eye contact. Tasha wasn't surprised. People often preferred to look away when confronted with uncomfortable situations, especially when it came to matters of authority and power. But Tasha wasn't the kind of person to shy away. She had faced far worse than a tense encounter with a police officer, and she wasn't about to back down now. She knew what she had to do next. She had to make sure her story was heard. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly by someone in a position of power. Tasha had been in situations where her life had been on the line, where every decision could mean life or death. But this was different. It wasn't about survival. It was about justice. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She had a lot of people to contact: friends, family, and most importantly, the people who could help her make sure this didn't go unnoticed. She opened her contacts and called her attorney. It was time to take the next step. The phone rang twice before someone answered. "Hello," a familiar voice said on the other end. It was her attorney, Sarah. "Hey, Sarah," Tasha said, her voice steady. "I need you to help me with something." "What's going on?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with concern. Tasha explained what had happened at the store: the officer's aggression, the bookshelf being shoved into her, and how she had stood her ground, refusing to let him intimidate her. "I'm going to file a formal complaint," Tasha said. "But I need your help to make sure this gets the attention it deserves." Sarah was silent for a moment. Tasha could hear her thinking on the other end of the line. She knew that Sarah understood the weight of what Tasha was saying. Sarah was a fierce advocate for justice, and she had seen firsthand how difficult it could be to hold people accountable when they were in positions of power. "I'll get started right away," Sarah said. "This officer won't get away with it. We'll make sure it's investigated thoroughly." Tasha nodded, even though Sarah couldn't see her. "Thanks, Sarah. I'll make sure to send over all the details and the report once it's filed. I want to make sure we have everything we need." "You got it," Sarah replied. "We'll get this sorted out. Just hang in there, Tasha. You're doing the right thing." Tasha ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket. She felt a sense of relief wash over her. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready for whatever came next. She wasn't about to let anyone walk over her, and she wasn't about to let this officer get away with his actions. As she continued walking, her thoughts drifted back to the day's events. It felt strange to think about how much had changed in such a short amount of time. Just hours ago, she had been casually shopping, enjoying a moment of normalcy. Now, she was taking a stand, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of authority. Tasha had always believed in standing up for what was right. But today, she realized that it wasn't just about standing up, it was about speaking out. She wasn't going to let the officer's actions slide under the radar. She wasn't going to let him or anyone else think they could treat people like they were less than. As she walked, her mind also turned to the other people in the store. She knew they had been watching. Some of them had probably been too afraid to say anything, unsure of how to handle the situation. But Tasha also knew that her actions had made an impact. She had shown them that it was okay to stand up to authority when it was wrong. She had shown them that it was okay to speak out. Tasha turned the corner onto her street and walked towards her apartment. The sun had set by now, and the sky was painted with hues of purple and pink. She felt a sense of peace settle over her as she reached her front door. It had been a long day, but she knew that the work she had just started would continue long after the sun went down. As she stepped inside, Tasha kicked off her shoes and walked into the kitchen. She needed something to eat, something to ground her after everything that had happened. She opened the fridge and pulled out some leftovers from the night before. As she heated up the food, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. There was still so much work ahead, but for the first time in a while, she felt hopeful. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. But Tasha knew she was ready. She had been through too much in her life to let a situation like this hold her back. As she sat down to eat, Tasha made a promise to herself. She wasn't going to let this be just another story swept under the rug. She was going to see it through to the end. And she was going to make sure that every person who had ever been mistreated had a voice, just like she did now. Tasha stood in the middle of the store, her mind calm but her heart racing with purpose. The officer, clearly rattled by her unwavering composure, took a step back, trying to regain some control over the situation. She wasn't going anywhere, and he knew it. For a moment, the only sound in the store was the low hum of the fluorescent lights above, the distant murmur of customers going about their business, unaware of the tense scene unfolding. The officer's eyes were now shifting, looking around the store for help, perhaps wondering if someone would step in to back him up. But no one moved. No one said a word. Tasha wasn't surprised. She had seen this kind of silence before. People often stood by, afraid to get involved, not wanting to risk confrontation. It was a sad truth she had learned in her years of experience. But in this moment, that silence worked in her favor. She had no intention of backing down. She could see the officer's hands start to tremble, a sign that he was beginning to feel the pressure. His confidence, once strong and certain, was slipping away. He was no longer the one in control, and that reality was starting to settle in. Tasha, however, didn't want to escalate things any further. She wasn't there to fight, but she also wasn't going to let him get away with treating her like she was invisible or less than. Her voice was steady when she spoke next, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. "What's your name, officer?" she asked, her tone polite, but firm. He hesitated, clearly unsure how to respond. She could see him weighing his options. Should he give her his name? Should he back off? He could feel the eyes of the store's customers on him now, even if they weren't speaking up. They were watching, waiting for something to happen. Finally, he muttered, "Officer Larson." His voice was much quieter now, his arrogance fading with each passing second. Tasha nodded. "Thank you, Officer Larson." She didn't say it with sarcasm, though part of her wanted to. Instead, she spoke like she was addressing a child who needed to be reminded of the rules. "I'd like you to know that I'm going to file a report for the assault you just committed." The words hung in the air, and the officer seemed to flinch as if the reality of the situation was sinking in. Tasha wasn't the kind of woman to shout or cause a scene, but her calm demeanor made it clear that she knew exactly what she was doing. And she had the means to back it up. The officer's gaze flickered, a mixture of guilt and fear flashing through his eyes. "You don't need to do that," he said quickly. "It was just a mistake." I I didn't mean to." Tasha cut him off, her voice unyielding. "You're right. You didn't mean to. But that doesn't change the fact that you did it. And now you need to take responsibility for your actions." There was a long pause as Officer Larson seemed to struggle with the weight of her words. Tasha could see that he was fighting to save face, trying to muster up whatever remaining pride he had left. But it wasn't working. Tasha's mind was racing. She had been through so much in her life, seen so many things that had tested her strength, both physically and mentally. Her journey hadn't been easy, and she wasn't the same person she had been when she first joined the Navy years ago. The young woman who had walked into that store, ready to grab a few things for her evening, had been shaped by the most intense training imaginable. She had become someone who understood the value of control, of staying calm under pressure. But more than that, she had learned how to stand up for herself and others when injustice was right in front of her. As she stood in front of Officer Larson, her posture straight and her gaze unwavering, she remembered those long days in Navy SEAL training. The grueling hours spent pushing her body and mind to their limits, learning how to stay composed when every instinct told her to fight, to run, to panic. But she didn't panic. Not anymore. The Navy had trained her to be strong in ways no one else could understand. And that strength was what allowed her to stay calm now, to face this officer who thought he could use his badge to intimidate her. But Tasha knew this wasn't just about her. It was about something bigger. It was about standing up to the systemic abuse of power that had plagued communities like hers for years. She wasn't the first person to be unfairly targeted by a police officer, and she wouldn't be the last. But she would make sure that her voice was heard. The store was still quiet, the tension thick in the air. Tasha could feel the eyes of the customers on her, some of them looking with sympathy, others with curiosity. A few seemed nervous, unsure of what would happen next. Tasha turned her attention back to Officer Larson, who was now fidgeting, his eyes darting around the room. He wasn't the picture of authority anymore. He wasn't the person who had barged in and tried to control the situation. Instead, he was a man who had been caught in his own lie, unsure of how to get out. "I'm not going anywhere," Tasha said softly. "And I'm not afraid of you. You're going to have to answer for what you did. You can't just push people around and expect them to stay quiet." Her words hung in the air, resonating not just with the officer, but with everyone who had witnessed the exchange. The officer seemed to shrink under her gaze. His shoulders slumped, and his face turned a shade redder. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words didn't come out. He was trapped, and he knew it. "I'm sorry," he muttered after a long pause. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just what?" Tasha interjected, her voice sharper now. "You were just trying to intimidate me, weren't you? You thought you could throw your weight around because you wear a badge." His eyes darted to the ground, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. Tasha could see that he didn't know how to react to her calm yet powerful presence. She wasn't angry, but there was a certain quiet authority in her voice that made it clear she wouldn't be silenced. "You're going to make this right," she said, her tone softening just slightly. "Not for me, but for the next person who might not be able to stand up for themselves." Officer Larson looked at her, his expression a mixture of guilt and shame. He had underestimated her from the start, and now he was paying the price for it. Tasha didn't want revenge. She didn't need to humiliate him. But she needed him and everyone else to understand that this wasn't how people should be treated. No one should have to fear being attacked by someone who was supposed to protect them. "I'll file the report," she said one final time, her voice steady. "And I'll make sure people hear about what happened here today." With that, she turned and walked toward the exit, leaving Officer Larson standing in the middle of the store, alone and defeated. The customers watched her as she left, some still unsure of what had just happened, but others looking at her with newfound respect. Outside, the sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the quiet street. Tasha took a deep breath and looked around. She hadn't planned on this moment, but she knew it was one she would never forget. And she was ready for whatever came next. The officer didn't respond right away. He eyed her suspiciously, taking a step closer. "You've been in here a little too long, don't you think?" he said, his tone sharp and accusatory. "What exactly are you doing here? This isn't a place for loitering." Tasha frowned, confused by the officer's attitude. She hadn't been in the store for more than 10 minutes, and she was simply getting a few things. But the officer seemed to have decided that she was up to something, and it didn't take long for his frustration to show. "I'm just buying some groceries," she said, trying to keep the situation from escalating. "Is there a problem with that?" The officer's eyes narrowed as he took another step closer. "I don't think you understand," he said, his voice growing louder. "You're here for too long, and I'm not about to let you cause trouble in my town." Tasha's heart rate quickened. She could feel the tension building, but she didn't want to make things worse. She looked around the store. No one else seemed to notice the exchange. People continued shopping, oblivious to the interaction happening just a few feet away. But then something unexpected happened. The officer's voice grew even more aggressive, and without warning, he shoved a bookshelf near Tasha's side, sending it tumbling toward her. The bookshelves, stacked high with magazines and small items, crashed to the ground, and one of the heavy shelves hit Tasha in the side. She staggered back, caught off guard by the sudden force. The air left her chest in a sharp gasp as she fell against the nearby shelves. Pain shot through her side, but what stung more than the physical impact was the shock of the officer's action. Tasha stood up slowly, her breath steadying. She wasn't sure what had just happened, but she knew one thing: this wasn't going to end here. The officer had made a mistake, and he was about to find out just who he had picked a fight with. She rubbed her side where the bookshelf had hit her. It wasn't too bad, but she could already feel a bruise starting to form. She looked up at the officer, who had taken a step back, watching her now with a sort of surprised arrogance, as if he had expected her to crumble. But Tasha didn't crumble. Instead, she stood up straight and locked eyes with him. Her military training had taught her how to remain calm under pressure, how to handle situations just like this one. The officer's move was reckless, but it wasn't the first time she'd had to deal with aggression. She had faced far worse than this. "Why did you do that?" she asked quietly, but there was strength in her voice that made the officer take another cautious step back. "You're not supposed to be here," he muttered, his voice shaky now. It was clear he didn't know how to handle the situation. Tasha's voice was calm, but it carried an unshakable force. "I'm just here for groceries. I haven't done anything wrong. You attacked me for no reason." She could see the officer's confusion. He had probably been trained to intimidate people like her, to use his badge to get what he wanted. But this time, it wasn't going to work. Tasha knew how to read people's body language. She could see the officer's body language shift. He was trying to regain control of the situation, but he couldn't. His posture was defensive, and he was beginning to realize that this wasn't just a woman he could push around. The customers in the store were starting to notice now. Some of them were glancing over at the scene unfolding between the officer and Tasha. She could see the stares. Some were sympathetic, others were wary, but no one was stepping in. They were all waiting to see what would happen next. Tasha didn't feel fear. She hadn't felt fear in years. The Navy SEAL training had prepared her for situations far more dangerous than this. She had trained to keep calm in life or death situations, to think quickly when the odds were against her. This was nothing in comparison. The officer's voice faltered, trying to regain the upper hand. "I said, you need to leave." Tasha shook her head slowly. "No, I'm not leaving. You need to apologize for what you did. You can't just assault people because you think you can get away with it." There was a long pause, and for the first time, the officer seemed uncertain. Tasha could see that he was processing her words, trying to make sense of the situation. Tasha wasn't done. She wasn't about to let this go. Not after what had just happened. She had faced so much in her life, from the hardships of growing up in a tough neighborhood to surviving the intense training of the Navy SEALs. This officer wasn't going to be another person who thought they could treat her like she was powerless. "Do you understand what you've done?" she asked, her voice firm. "You assaulted me, and you've caused a scene. This is not how you're supposed to behave. You're supposed to protect people, not hurt them." The officer stood there in silence. Tasha's words had clearly rattled him, but instead of escalating the situation, she waited. She was calm, collected, and ready to see this through. And as she stood there in that small store, she knew that whatever happened next, she would not back down.